welcome back to another episode of Bestseller TV. I am your host, Cynthia Johnson, and my co-host, Rhett Power, will not be joining us today. He's off doing the college drop-off, but we are here with an incredible author and an incredible careerist, if you will. Eric D. Stone wrote his book, Jumpstart Your Workplace Culture. After a 26-year career at the iconic rental car company Enterprise Holdings. After he retired, Eric also founded Clear Path Ventures to help businesses and people navigate their path to success. Welcome, Eric. I cannot wait to speak to you. Anyone who becomes, the vice president or regional vice president of a company that big is really committed to culture. So this book is fantastic. It reflects that. But I have to start by asking, 26 years, retire in 2018, you start Clear Path. This book comes out in 2023. Mm-hmm. What inspired you to write the book now?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. And, for me, I used to get asked periodically in interviews, and they would say, hey, Eric, what are you and your team doing to create, whether it was that customer service culture, the sales culture, what have you. And we were fortunate to be ranked very highly on all the balance reports that we'd have. And so they would ask, what are you guys doing? And I remember going to a lot of the conferences I would go to, and we all had these 4 core areas, and we're all kind of saying the same thing. And so I was putting 2 and 2 together, and it really was culture that allowed us to separate ourselves. So there was something within the fabric of our organization that allows your team to truly execute at a high level. And I felt that's what I loved about culture. It was that shock absorber during bad times, and it was that catalyst to execution that allows people to really grow their beliefs and behaviors within the organization. And I felt I had, most importantly, something to give. I felt the subject matter is it's a bit nebulous. It's sometimes can be too academic. I think it's misunderstood they think it's soft and philosophical, built on these rousing speeches. And while those are important pieces, they're not the big part. And I wanted to have a practical roadmap that has visuals in it, practical steps to allow people to truly create something unique within an organization, especially with 5 generations in the workplace. How do you, everyone valuing different aspects? What do you need to do to create that secret sauce? And especially in now remote, in-person, hybrid, there's just so many factors that have put this front and center. So that's a little bit of what kind of inspired me to impact more than maybe a few hundred employees. Maybe it's a few thousand, 10,000, whatever it may be. So that's why I wanted to try to give a message of impact.
Absolutely. And you say that it's not just the big speeches. It's not just, what are some of the biggest misconceptions around culture?
Yeah, I think, that a lot of people think you can't measure it. And while there are pulse surveys and there are a lot of things that allow people to get a piece of it, I felt you really could measure it. And you just have to use certain things that if you I call it a 6-point inspection that I write about. And my whole thing's a metaphor in the book. It's about a road trip, because that's what kind of building culture is. And so I kind of lay out this, when you double weight engagement and customer satisfaction, that's usually where the experiences matter, into your formula. And then kind of lie out a few qualitative things, such as, the ethics and values of your organization, your D&I initiatives. Like, how do you, so step 1, the myth is you can't measure it. I felt there was a component that you could. And then the other thing is it's very intentional. It's not just academic. You can have empathy with accountability. You can have high character, high standard with a great mix of training and trust. And so you can do all those things. And so I think those are a few myths that they feel it almost is too empathetic, but that's part of it, just piece of it.
I love the road trip. So for those listening, can you explain, are there stages to the road trip? Is it like getting people in the car or getting
people? So there's a hiring chapter that talks about choose your passengers carefully when you're going on a road trip, and so everything has a bit of, warning signs just like with a vehicle, there are some warning signs when you're building culture that you need to be mindful of, talking about measurement standpoints. There are rear view mirror things in each chapter that you got to sometimes look and reflect a little bit. There are what's on the bumper sticker, little anecdotes or stories that might be helpful. So there's a lot of things that I thought would align the journey of a road trip to building this culture and some symbolism. I always felt a metaphor makes it stick. And I was searching for what is that thing, and to know you're never done. It never ends. I mean, there's something around the corner, just like in life. There's always a surprise. And so you have to have certain approaches to be ready for it.
Well, of course, also after your career, it's like the perfect metaphor for you and the book.
You know, it's so true, right? Coincidentally, I happen to work in a rental car industry for transportation with the road trip. And I think that's what makes things in organizations stick. And that's how organizations get traction is whether you're reading a book and it just goes in alignment, or your organization has these policies and procedures and key priorities. The great organizations, it just seems to make sense. They might not all get it the exact same, meaning the new hire to the senior leader, but that's what makes it stick.
I would take this a step further, this metaphor here. So who is it, the leader always driving?
No, not always. No, not always. I thought it was my job to create the boundaries, ensure that the policies and procedures make sense. And to give the Taylor family, who was part of Enterprise in that field, they created the mission, vision, and values, and those were our guiding decision-making process. So I think it does start with listing, as they say, the values. It would be my job to live and make sure that our decisions follow those values. Then it comes up to what I call culture carriers. It starts maybe with me, but I need others within the organization who are going to understand the message, be willing to open up to the senior leaders when things might go awry. And they are, in our case, we called them the think tank. And so there were a group of people nominated by their peers, all branch managers, and they would meet with me every other month. And they really drove the bus from there. I mean, I might have laid some of the foundations, some of the priorities we would come with together, but it was their job to come up with creative things, whether they were opportunities, challenges. What do we need to be ready for? And they would control the agenda. We would have a running list of accomplishments that this group of managers or leaders would help us navigate. And they were instrumental in it to the point where you have it cultural is when the new hire employee says, hey, how do I get on the think tank? Meaning there's value from it. It's not just a meeting for a meeting, which is another challenge a lot of organizations have. And so it's a bit of yes, it starts with the leader. The culture carriers really take over. They became the voice. And so I think that is very helpful for it.
Oh, culture carriers. It's great. It's like almost like internal ambassadors, sort of. Incredible. Okay, but I'm just curious too, because burnout has been a big question, not just even for employees, for leaders too, right? Everybody's is burnt out. So how does culture impact engagement and maybe stop burnout?
There's a few powerful things. So first of all, there are, in my opinion, there's these 5 key factors that create employee engagement. Engagement's a piece of culture. If you remember, we opened up with the 6-point inspection. There's a variety of things. It's not one. And so I think the really good organizations that I either worked with, focus on developing strong relationships throughout their organization. What are the things from hire to the training process to leadership presence? What are they doing to encourage this listen, observe, and learn, this seeds of trust being built early on? So they're really good at that with initiatives under how does every level create relationships. Number 2 is clear communication of expectations and goals. They're just really lasered in. When you don't know what you're doing, it can get very stressful and you can get very anxious. And I use this ABCs of communication, where you have to learn when to amplify the message, when to buffer the message, synthesize it a little bit, streamline it, or convey it, just passing it along, some of those things. Now, when you buffer and convey really well the amplify message, those priorities usually stick. So they're really good at clearly communicating those goals and expectations with a really what settings they do that in and how often do they do it. The third is right material and equipment information in order to achieve the desired outcome. So they have to have some sort of continuous learning that goes on within the organization. When you're given information and you feel you're capable of doing it, there again is usually a little bit less anxiety that could happen. I'm not saying it's all the answers, but it's a really helpful piece when people feel that they have the ability to be successful. The fourth was, how are you encouraging personal and professional growth? So it was always big of the initiatives I always try to bring up are, don't just be great at work, take those practices, maybe you're great at home. And so what do organizations do to create personal goal settings where they learn that maybe I'm trying to buy my first house, maybe I want to be a third degree black belt, a second language, whatever it could be. And so they have a great way to balance that personal and professional within the confines of the organization. And then lastly, I think they recognize effort, but reward excellence. And that is, they recognize top performance. And so when you take those, and when I talk to organizations or do speaking engagements, I usually say, if you're going to design it, start with those 5, and then take it to your team and build the initiatives that will help you put that throughout the fabric of your organization. And so step 1, values. Do you live them and list them? Step 2, what are your factors of engagement? Does everyone understand what that will do? And you probably know better than anybody that when you have elite engagement, it tends to lead to really good business outcomes. That's a win-win. So got the answers to the test.
It's incredibly, make it sound so easy, but I guess if you have those benchmarks in place, then rewarding excellence becomes easier because it sort of speaks for itself. It's not like a accidental favoritism or anything.
The key is, and listen, I fell victim to this early in my career where you could be a critic at times. And what I found very helpful for the recognize is it's okay to say, Cynthia, that was really impressive what you just did with customer A. I love how you, or hey, what went behind that decision? That was really powerful. How did you, it's okay to do it because we're going to find you having some opportunities too. And that's that recognition. And I think we would all agree it's too easy to critique people. So you got to have that balance.
It absolutely is. And how does that engagement sort of carry over to the customer experience? Because in businesses, we're faced with a million obstacles, and sometimes we over ask from employees, or how do we make sure that the customer doesn't sort of see behind the curtain?
So I'll share a story that might paint into exactly what you're talking about. And I use this quite often, and this will go into engagement leading to great experiences on the customer side. But I'll give you the fast forward version. But you ever heard of the story about Johnny the Bagger?
Go on, please. Most of our listeners have.
So there was a large supermarket chain who hired a consultant, and they hired the consultant because they needed to change and fix their customer service and loyalty program. And the consultant comes in and does give an electrifying speech that each and every one of you can make a difference and create memories that will allow your customers to come back. And how are you going to do it? Well, you're going to put your personal signature on every interaction. Well, she gets a call about a month later from a young man named Johnny the Bagger. And Johnny proudly informs her that he has Down syndrome. And at first he didn't know if he could make a difference, but then he had an idea. And every night he'd go home and he would write a thought of the day. And on the back of the thought would be, thank you for shopping with us. And he would bring that to work. So what happens a month later? The store manager is doing their rounds. Johnny's line is 3 times longer than anybody's line. So the store manager is getting a little stressed out. Wait a sec, we got to have more lines open. We got to get people in. When one of the customers taps him on the shoulder and says, no, it's okay. We're waiting for Johnny's thought of the day. He's like, oh, wow. Well, then he hears someone find right in the frozen food section, all the way back. Another one says, I used to shop here once a week. I now come here anytime I'm in the area because I want to get Johnny's thought of the day. But it doesn't stop there. So another month passes, and the store manager calls the consultant and says, you're now not going to believe it. Now our floral department on any broken flower, unused corsage, walks around the grocery store and pins it on a young child or an elderly individual. And so Johnny's actions, being engaged, thinking he could truly make a difference, feeling comfortable to go and make that difference, transforms the entire store. And so that's the power of the engaged employee leading to a unique experience that creates loyalty and long-term customer satisfactions or great experiences.
Wow. Now I want to go as a kid. uh, how, I mean, Johnny's such a special case. Like, how do you encourage or inspire employees to be Johnny?
So great question. I'll tell you exactly what we did. So this actually happened to me. So we were struggling with customer service and we were searching deeply. We were going into our busiest time of year and we had to change the behavior. Something was off. We were just flatlining, going into busy time. That's not great.
Mm-hmm.
All these interns coming in, need to get them trained and up to speed. So I challenged my think tank and regional manager to say, hey, we've got to find something that's going to make a difference. Well, long story short, they found the Johnny the Bagger video. We took that video and that went into our new hire training class, that when we were to bring people aboard, we needed to not just say, hey, customer service is important to us. We needed to show the behaviors of what we look for and what we expect in every interaction. And it was Johnny the Bagger. But just like Johnny, we didn't stop there. It then went through all of our training classes. So your first true training outside of the new hire, about a month in, you'd come back up, you'd watch the Johnny the Bagger video. We then made a weekly meeting for customer service to recognize and reward this Johnny the Bagger mentality, and you would vote on who the Johnny the Bagger was for the week. Who is the one who went above and beyond and created these special memories? But we didn't stop there. We then, at the end of the month, they would nominate all of these stories, and I would get the winner chosen by my regional manager, and I would, of course, endorse it. And they would come to our bi-monthly awards ceremony that would be usually at my house. And so we would announce the Johnny the Bagger winners there. But again, we didn't stop there. It goes into the reviews of our employees because we wanted people to understand, under the other column of customer service, are you truly representing the behaviors of a Johnny the Bagger? And that's where I think a lot of people, you said it great in the beginning, it seems so simple. It's simple, but not simplistic to do all of this stuff. You have to be extremely intentional and find ways. That's what avoids the confusion, avoids the noise, becomes the distraction catcher under the buffer of communication. It becomes, oh my God, I know what it means to be a Johnny the Bagger. I'm going to demonstrate it. Wow, they'll recognize it and reward it. And you shift the behaviors.
It's interesting because what I run a personal brand agency that used prior to COVID, we worked with employees. Mm-hmm. And right before COVID started, we ran a large campaign with Walmart employees. And it was so interesting because what you're talking about is exactly what we were trying to do. So as taking real stories, real people. The most difficult part, whether it was Walmart or any other company, was trying to explain, because ultimately you can have an agency come in, but leadership has to buy in. Like, they have to buy in. And it does take those 30 days for Johnny to get his notes out. And it takes the 30 days more for, and I'm curious if, like, time, like, how long does this take, and how do you keep leadership from kind of getting
well, I
nervous?
think so this is where and again, this is my perspective. So it was really important, if I wanted to encourage this and make a quick turn, everything goes to rollout. I'm going to try to see. I don't know if I can pop it up. I don't know if I can. You can kind of, is it in the back? Okay. There right over my shoulder, something called the hourglass. And this was all about how you get the message out. So we wanted a visual, right? I said metaphor for the book. And what it does is, when you give a visual of how do we roll this out quickly, is, so step one was the listen, observe, and learn. We had our think tank, our regional managers coming up with what's going on, what are we missing? We then go to the orchestrate phase, where you're bringing in your managers and saying, we've identified something. We have something here. Let's go to as the hourglass comes out and we're going to synthesize the information. Let's focus on 3 key priorities for the Johnny the Bagger and how we're going to roll it out to the remainder of the team. And then as the hourglass comes out, you're reinforcing it. You are now doing a morning huddle maybe with your local brick and mortars where they're going to explain some of this content. You might have a conference call, a follow-up conference call. You might have an in-person meeting. All your training classes are about this. And so it becomes pretty hard not to get within the fabric of the company. But that's why I like the hourglass, which again, I'll get out of the way. And then on the bottom is where you assess it. So the last phase is an assessment phase where you're going to start, I guess either recognizing or rewarding some of that, but really getting the stories, and assessing all this stuff. And right when you think you have it, just like in life, you have to turn the hourglass over and start over because, an angry customer comes in and can get us out of our rhythm. So the 2 pillars on each side were mission, vision, values, and policies and procedures of the hourglass. And those are your guiding, how you make those decisions I was describing earlier. But so those are ways. Now, leadership must. So for example, it would be really important that I attend, whether it's virtually, a huddle, a weekly setting that they might have to go over who won it. It would be equally as important if some of my department heads would try to join in, even though it had nothing to do with maybe their responsibility. They might have been in charge of just hiring people or selling things. And I wanted them to know that they have an equal, we need their encouragement. And so now everyone is kind of, as they say, the canoe, everyone's pulling in the same direction, not just me, not just regional managers, not just staff members, not just branch managers. The new hire already got the video. And then you celebrate those victories. And that's the other crucial thing. When we did this is we were very vocal on the number because we would get weekly scores. And so as we would do it, you could feel the momentum changing. And you do need some early victories. And it was important. We were fortunate to get those early victories. And then as trust is built, just like in any relationship, things get a little bit easier and it sticks. It becomes a little funner. When you're, as they say, winning can be fun, when you're starting to put up some numbers.
That's so true. So, people are engaged.
Yeah.
Right. So who is, we're going to shift gears in the interview a little bit, but before we do, I'd love to know who should read this book.
I would say I think, well, first of all, anyone in HR, I think would be a very good audience. So when I talk at a lot of the events, HR conferences and things like that, I think there's a lot of value that goes into it. And then I would say leadership of teams. So, or organizations, of course. So anyone who's involved, because just because you're not the CEO doesn't mean in your 4 walls of where you operate, you can't impact people. And so I would say start with HR. I would then say go to those who lead a pretty large team. But then these principles are beautiful. It could be 5 people, it could be 500 people. But I think that will help. That's probably the sweet spot.
The sweet spot. Great. No, I could see this being also like a book club, an internal book club, at a company, because learning these things on the way up is also so important.
Yeah. I mean, I made my kids read it to their, I'm sure they didn't really want to, but they're all in the workplace now. And I'm not saying to them I have all the answers. What I'm saying is watch some of the principles either through interviews or stories of my own, or people who have done it for even longer than I have. And there are some timeless principles that will help. Because I always believe, people, it was time management, difficult conversations, are 2 key things. How to have an effective meeting. I mean, these are all principles of great organizations of where a lot of people fall short. They don't know how to say, Cynthia, how to have that difficult conversation. They don't know how to encourage or guide you on how to run that effective meeting. And sometimes we just can't get out of our own way because we just can't reprioritize things. And so these are all things that within a really strong culture are trained, and that's why I think it's so intentional.
Absolutely. So timelines for, we have a lot of authors that are reading this, potential authors and writers. So I'm curious again, just you have this lengthy career, you go into, which many of our authors do, these sort of, they try to retire, but they don't actually retire. why now write the book? What was there an aha moment where you said, you know what, I have to get this out?
I think a few of them. I think the first one, and I maybe lightly talked about it, but uh, I just felt it was a misunderstood concept, and I felt that to me, there's that culture and strategy, and which is, to me, it's not that people can't come up with a creative idea. It's not that forecasting meetings or strategic plans. I mean, I think a lot of companies, they're brilliant, but what they tend to miss is the simplicities of execution. And in my opinion, that's the point for me of what culture allows your team to do. They embrace, they engage, they understand, they feel empowered, and they then carry the actual plan to its fruition. The individuals are the ones doing all the work. So for me, it's just why companies win. And I was always fascinated with what makes organizations special, and not just for a year. And so when we would get someone promoted in a big position, we better have a bench ready, because if we've truly built that strong culture, we needed to have people to replace. And so, catalyst to execution, misunderstood, and I felt I could impact more than a few hundred people. And it's Cynthia, it's like, how do you get in shape? Everybody knows if I sleep well, eat well, and work out, I'm pretty good. Now, in between that, that's a good starting point. Under each, it gets very complicated when you get your dietary needs, and what are you going to have per meal, and how will you prep? And then the exercises is Monday back and bi and cardio and whatever it is. And so then it can get challenging. And so I wanted to share the message with more people. And this book allowed me to, I never thought I'd write a book, ever. My English teacher would be surprised that I took this venture to write a book.
Oh,
And it just turned out to be something that is probably one of my proudest moments, and wanted to give up so many times. So,
yeah. I was gonna ask, was there anything that surprised you in the book writing process?
um, it surprised me. I mean, I didn't realize the first marathon was writing it, and then the second marathon was marketing it. I mean,
Yeah.
there's two different marathons that go on. A lot of pleasant surprises. We did a book tour when we first started in California. We did one at the Stanford bookstore, really busy store. And 3 months after that event, we get an email. I got an email saying, "You don't know me, but my mom bought the book and she gifted it to me, and I read it and I loved it, and I'm bringing it to my company." And those are the better surprises. So many surprises of how complicated it is to write a book, how hard it is, and then so many pleasant surprises from that one anecdotal one. I had the former president of Starbucks read the book and write a review on it. I mean, this is the former president of Starbucks reading Eric Stone's book. I mean, so there's so many really special moments that you go on through your journey. So right when you're about to call timeout, like, oh my God, can I do this? Those moments can pop up.
That's absolutely, for all of those people listening, writing a book, thinking about it, you have this great career and big ideas. I think you're also an example for people in leadership who've done it, who've done the thing, who've done it well, have something to share, and could really, like you, help improve and spread the message, because inside of enterprise, you could only really help
Yeah.
help them,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, again, it's nothing wrong with helping 5 people, 500 people, but if you feel you have something and you're not afraid to go out on that ledge, then why wouldn't you try it? And like I said, one of the most rewarding moments for me, it's always there. I mean, anyone can do it, Cynthia. You just got to have the time and some grit and discipline to do it, and want to have the message you want to spread. But yeah.
Excellent. And before we wrap up here, I'd love to know if you could ensure that every reader takes away this one thing, what would it be?
Oh, that's a tough one. Such a good question. Such a good question. I mean, I'd start with the simple part of those 5 key factors of engagement. I think are so easy to do. and I've worked with companies, and it's such a fun exercise. I mean, I'd say, hey, start there. I would then tell them to think about the hourglass approach. But then I don't want them to miss out on, there's some hiring things that I think are really important on the difference between match and fit that we didn't even really have a chance to. I mean, there's just so much you could go into. But those are a few that I'd say, I think at the very least, and it's such a good point. It's like, what are your takeaways? And I think everyone will have their own, but I think those would be three great takeaways. And they're not that complicated. One's visual, one's kind of bullet pointed out, and the other is your process of hiring. And how do you truly train people to interview? It's an art and a science. It is hard to do. And I had many, many mistakes in my early career. I probably lost some really good people because I didn't understand how to interview.
Yeah. No, I mean, maybe if we could just take that from the book, that would go. And where can we find the book? Where can we find you?
So you can go to Amazon is certainly a place. Barnes and Noble near you. One of my nice victories was at least one Barnes and Noble in every state is carrying the book, at least once. That was kind of cool. But Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookstore near you would be the best place. And then the best place to reach out to me is probably LinkedIn. I am probably the most active on that, though I'm not a social media expert by any means. That's the platform I try to put some content from the book, as well as Instagram, things like that.
Okay, incredible. And your website, ericdstone.com, I believe, right?
So that'll
where
tell you
I've been...
a lot about the book, is the ericdstone.com.
Okay.
And then ClearPath Ventures is the company site, of which I'll usually either do speaking, consulting, individual coaching through that.
Excellent. Well, we will leave all of that obviously in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure. And for all of you who are listening, we will have another bestseller